My daughter Haley always had a flair for the dramatic. As a child, it was scraped knees that required the performance of a battlefield amputation. As a teenager, it was a C+ on a report card that became a Shakespearean tragedy about her thwarted potential. I suppose I should have recognized the pattern for what it was, a rehearsal. For 40 years, she had been rehearsing for the role of a lifetime, the part of the deeply wounded victim. And I, her mother, was to be the villain of the piece. The curtain rose on this final grand production a few months ago. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I was pruning the rose bushes my late husband David had planted for me on our 25th anniversary. Their thorns were a familiar, almost friendly prick against my leather gloves. Haley pulled into the driveway, her little hybrid car gliding to a silent stop. She was 38 years old, though she carried herself with the aggrieved entitlement of a teenager who'd just had her phone taken away. She got out of the car, clutching a leather tote bag to her chest like a shield. She didn't say hello. She didn't comment on the roses, which were particularly lovely that year. She stood on the flagstone path and announced, with the gravity of a surgeon delivering a terminal diagnosis, that she had started seeing a new therapist. I paused, snippers in hand. "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetheart. I've always thought talking things out can be so helpful. Who are you seeing?" Her eyes, the same deep blue as her father's, narrowed. "Her name is Dr. Ann Reed. She's a clinical psychologist specializing in familial trauma." The way she said it, familial trauma, sent a little chill down my spine, even in the warm afternoon sun. It sounded like something you'd read on a slick brochure in a cold, sterile waiting room. It didn't sound like my Haley. The first volley came that very evening. I was making David's favorite pot roast, the whole house filled with the warm, savory scent of my love for him, a smell that had comforted Haley her entire life. She stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. "Dr. Reed helped me have a major breakthrough today," she said. Her voice was flat, rehearsed. "I've realized that my inability to form lasting romantic attachments is a direct result of the insecure attachment style you fostered in me as a child." I put down the ladle. My hand was trembling just a little. "I'm sorry, what? Insecure attachment, Haley, you had a wonderful childhood. Your father and I adored you." "That's what you think," she said, her voice gaining a sharp, accusatory edge. "But my subconscious remembers. Dr. Reed says the body keeps the score. You were always so busy, so preoccupied. You were a classic example of an emotionally unavailable mother." The accusation hung in the air, thick and greasy as smoke. It felt like a physical blow. Me, emotionally unavailable? I was the one who held her for hours when she had colic. I was the one who coached her soccer team, who proofread every single college application essay, who sat with her for a week straight after her first serious breakup, letting her cry and eat ice cream until she felt whole again. The memories, so warm and treasured just moments before, now felt like evidence for the prosecution. That was only the beginning. For the next 6 weeks, my life became a walking pop psychology textbook. Haley would come over or call me, armed with a new diagnosis of my failings. I was a narcissist because I once told her she'd look lovely in a blue dress for a cousin's wedding. I had gaslit her by telling her she was overreacting when she'd had a screaming fight with a barista. I had inflicted repressed traumas on her by making her finish her piano lessons, an activity she had begged to start. Each accusation was delivered with the unshakable conviction of a new convert, and each was attributed to the sage wisdom of this Dr. Ann Reed. The therapist had become a phantom third person in our relationship, an invisible judge and jury who was systematically dismantling 40 years of motherhood. Haley would say things like, "Dr. Reed says that your constant need to fix my problems is a manifestation of your own control issues." Or, "Dr. Reed helped me understand that the financial support you've given me was never a gift, but a tool to create dependency." The financial support, that was the part that truly stung. It wasn't about revenge, not at first. At first, it was just a deep, cavernous hurt that seemed to echo in every room of my quiet house. My life as a 65-year-old widow was supposed to be entering its peaceful phase. My work as a landscape architect had been fulfilling and had left me with a comfortable retirement. I had my garden, my friends, my memories of a good marriage. My only real worry for years had been Haley, not her health, not her safety, but her softness, her inability to stick with anything. The graphic design degree she abandoned for a yoga instructor certification, which she abandoned for an attempt at being a life coach. Each new venture was funded by me, each failure was cushioned by me. I'd paid off her credit cards 3 times. I'd co-signed on 2 different cars, both of which she'd managed to damage within months. I was still paying the insurance on her current one. My friends saw it, especially Carol. Carol and I have been best friends since we were roommates in college, 2 bright-eyed girls with terrible perms and big dreams. I became a landscape architect, shaping the earth into places of beauty and peace. She became a clinical psychologist, shaping the human mind towards the same goals. For 40 years, she had been my rock, my confidant, my voice of reason. And for the last 15 of those years, she'd been gently, lovingly telling me that I was enabling Haley. "You're not helping her, Mer," she'd say over our weekly lunches. "You're teaching her that consequences don't apply to her. You're building a cage of comfort around her, and one day you won't be here to maintain it." I knew she was right on some level, but I had my reasons. It was a reason I clutched to my chest like a rosary, a promise. When David was in the hospital, in those last hazy days, he had grabbed my hand. His own was so thin, the skin like parchment over his knuckles. "Take care of our girl, Mer," he had whispered, his voice raspy. "She's brilliant, but the world is sharp. Be her shield." And so I had. I had stood between Haley and the sharp edges of the world. I had been her shield, her safety net, her ever-open wallet. I had mistaken it for love. Now my daughter was telling me that my shield had been a weapon, and my love had been a poison. According to her new, all-knowing therapist, the breaking point, the moment the deep, cavernous hurt began to harden into something else, something cold and sharp, came on a rainy Thursday. Haley called me. Her voice was shaking with what sounded like righteous fury. "I can't believe you did it," she sobbed into the phone. "I just can't believe it. Dr. Reed said this might happen. She said that when a child of a narcissistic parent begins to find their voice, the parent will often lash out in subtle, cruel ways to re-establish control." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What are you talking about, Haley? What did I do?" "The dog," she wailed. "Buttons, you know I wanted him." My mind went completely blank. Buttons was a golden retriever that belonged to my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who had recently moved into an assisted living facility. Mrs. Gable couldn't take him with her. Haley had mentioned, offhandedly, that a dog would be good for her emotional regulation. She'd seen a picture of him and said he was cute, but she hadn't offered to take him, hadn't asked about his vet bills, hadn't made any concrete move at all. Another neighbor, a young family with 2 children, had been desperate for a dog and had officially adopted Buttons 2 days ago. I had nothing to do with it. "Haley," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "the Miller family adopted Buttons. I didn't have anything to do with that decision. You only mentioned him once." "Don't lie to me," she shrieked. "You did it to punish me, to show me that I can't have anything good unless you approve of it. Dr. Reed warned me. This is classic narcissistic injury. You couldn't stand that I was getting healthy, that I was setting boundaries, so you took away something I wanted." I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down. I placed it gently back in its cradle, as if it were a piece of delicate, explosive ordnance. I stood in my silent kitchen and looked out the window at the rain sluicing down the glass, blurring the vibrant green of my garden into a watercolor mess. The shield, my promise to David, felt impossibly heavy. It wasn't protecting Haley from the world's sharp edges. It was protecting her from reality, and in the process, it was allowing her to sharpen her own edges and drive them, one by one, into me. The charade was over. My love had been weaponized against me, and the grief I felt was swiftly being burned away by a cold, clarifying anger. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about survival. I picked up the phone again and dialed Carol's number. My hand was perfectly steady now. "Carol," I said when she answered, "we need to talk. I think it's time to schedule an intervention, but not the kind Haley is expecting." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Carol's voice, low and serious. "I've been waiting for this call, Mer. Tell me everything." And so I did. I told her about the insecure attachment, the emotional unavailability, the gaslighting, the narcissistic injury. I told her about the dog. As I recounted the litany of accusations, I could feel the last vestiges of my maternal guilt dissolving, replaced by a crystalline certainty. My daughter was not wounded. She was a predator who had found a new exciting vocabulary for her hunt. Carol listened patiently, making small sounds of affirmation. When I was finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "Mer, what if this Dr. Reed? What if she started giving Haley some different advice? What if she started guiding her toward a truth Haley has no interest in finding?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "We don't even know who this woman is. Haley found her online." Carol's voice took on a thoughtful, almost mischievous tone. "Haley doesn't know who she is either, Murter. She's just a name on a screen, a voice on the phone. Haley has never met her in person. All their sessions are telehealth, video calls." A strange, audacious idea began to form in the space between our two houses, crackling down the phone line. An idea so bold, so outrageous, it made me gasp. "Carol," I whispered. "You can't be serious." "Why not?" she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I'm a retired clinical psychologist with 40 years of experience dealing with personality disorders. I've still got my credentials, even if my license to practice is inactive. This wouldn't be therapy. It would be a very specific, very targeted educational exercise for the good of the family." The phrase "for the good of the family" was one my own mother used to use to justify all sorts of minor tyrannies. Hearing Carol use it now felt like a delicious piece of irony. The plan, in all its mad brilliance, bloomed in my mind. It was deceitful. It was manipulative. It was ethically questionable at best. And it was, I realized with a jolt of exhilaration, absolutely perfect. "Okay," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "Let's talk about Dr. Ann Reed. Let's give her a history, let's give her a voice, and let's start recording her sessions." My breakdown didn't happen all at once. It was a slow crumble, like a riverbank, eroding under a relentless current. For weeks after Haley's campaign of psychological warfare began, I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, a cold sweat beading on my forehead. I'd lie in the dark, in the bed I had shared with David for nearly 40 years, and I would sift through the archives of my memory, searching for the evidence of my crimes. Was I emotionally unavailable? I remembered a business trip to Philadelphia when Haley was 9. I had to design a public park, a huge career-making project. I was gone for 4 days. When I called home on the second night, Haley was quiet on the phone. David said she missed me. Was that it? Was that the foundational trauma she was talking about? 4 days out of a lifetime of presence? I remembered flying home a day early, surprising her at school, the way her face lit up before she buried it in my coat, smelling of airplane air and relief. I had thought it was a memory of love, of reunion. Now in the dark, it felt tainted. Had I created a wound just so I could have the satisfaction of healing it? The thought was grotesque, a serpent coiling in my gut. I would wander through the house at 3 in the morning, a ghost in my own life. I'd trace the pencil marks on the kitchen door frame where we'd tracked Haley's height from a wobbly toddler to a young woman who towered over me. Each line was a moment in time. Was I distracted when I drew that line for her 10th birthday? Was I thinking about a client's irrigation plan instead of being fully present in the moment of my daughter's growth? Haley's accusations were like a virus, infecting every happy memory, turning them into exhibits of my failure. I'd sit in the living room, clutching a photo album, the stiff plastic pages cool against my skin. Here was Haley at her 5th birthday party, a smear of chocolate frosting on her cheek, a paper crown askew on her head. She was beaming, but was I looking at her, or was I looking past her, worried about whether the other mothers were judging the state of my house? Here she was at her high school graduation, valedictorian, her speech full of jokes and heartfelt thanks. I was in the front row, weeping with pride. But was my pride for her, or was it for myself? Was it a reflection of my success as a mother? The doubt was an acid, eating away at the very foundations of my identity. I was a mother. It was the most profound, most central part of who I was, and my daughter, my only child, was telling me I had done it all wrong. It was a complete negation of my life's most important work. The flashbacks came unbidden, sharp and clear as glass. I remembered Haley at 16. She'd wanted to go to a concert in the city on a school night with a boy I didn't trust. David and I had said no. It was a firm, united front. The next day, David found her crying in her room. She told him, her voice thick with tears, that I had said she could go, but only if she lied to him about it. She claimed I'd said, "Your father is too strict, we'll just keep it between us girls." She twisted a simple note into a conspiracy, painting me as the schemer and her father as the obstacle. It was a masterful piece of manipulation. David, bless his heart, saw right through it. He came downstairs, put his arm around me and said, "Nice try, kiddo. Your mother and I are a team." We'd laughed about it later, marveling at her audacity, but looking back now, I saw the seed of what was happening. She wasn't just lying to get what she wanted, she was trying to fracture our alliance, to isolate me, to control the narrative. Then there was the money. Oh God, the money. It started small. $100 here and there in college to cover a textbooks that was really a weekend trip. After she graduated, it became more serious. She moved to a trendy part of the city, into an apartment she couldn't afford, convinced a high-paying graphic design job was just around the corner. It wasn't. For 2 years I subsidized her rent, her utilities, her organic groceries. My justification, the one I repeated to myself like a mantra, was David's dying wish: be her shield. I saw the bills not as enabling but as shielding her from the harsh reality of a competitive job market. I remembered the day she called me, sobbing from the side of a road. She'd crashed her car, the one I'd put the down payment on. It wasn't a bad accident, but she was hysterical. She'd been texting, she admitted, and hadn't seen the car in front of her stop. I paid for the repairs. I paid the increase in her insurance premium. I never once said, "This was your fault, Haley." I just soothed her, paid the bills, and told myself I was being a supportive parent. Carol had called me that evening. "Mir, you just taught her that a $5,000 mistake has no personal cost." I'd gotten defensive. She was scared, Carol. What was I supposed to do? Leave her stranded? No, Carol had said patiently. You were supposed to let her feel the consequences. You were supposed to let her figure out how to pay for the repairs herself. That's how people learn. But the most galling memory, the one that made my stomach clench with a mixture of anger and shame, was from about a year ago. I was meeting with my financial advisor, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, who had managed my retirement portfolio for years. We were going over my accounts. I was planning a trip to Italy, something I'd always dreamed of. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Meredith," he said, his brow furrowed, "I see another significant withdrawal from your main investment account last month. $20,000. Can I ask what this was for?" I felt a hot flush of embarrassment. Oh, that was for Haley. She had a brilliant idea for an online business. artisanal, curated gift boxes. She needed seed money. Mr. Henderson steepled his fingers, his expression carefully neutral. This is the third seed money withdrawal in 5 years, Meredith. The first was for the Etsy shop, selling hand-painted scarves. The second was for the life coaching website. Neither of those ventures is still active, are they? No, I admitted quietly. They're not. He leaned forward, his voice gentle. Meredith, I'm not just your advisor. I hope you consider me a friend. Your retirement is healthy, but it is not infinite. You've worked hard for this money. It's meant to provide you with security and joy in your later years. It is not a slush fund for speculative ventures. The shame was immense. He was right. David's words echoed in my head. Be her shield. But was I shielding her, or was I setting fire to my own future to keep her momentarily warm? The artisanal gift box business, of course, had folded within 6 months. The inventory of expensive candles and organic soaps was still sitting in boxes in my garage, and I had quietly canceled my trip to Italy. These memories churned within me during those sleepless nights. The pattern was so clear, so painfully obvious in hindsight. I had built this monster of entitlement piece by piece, with every check I wrote, every consequence I absorbed on her behalf. And now the monster had learned to speak a new language, the language of therapy, to justify its own insatiable appetite. It wasn't my fault she was this way, but my God, I had been her most dedicated architect. The catalyst, the final push that turned my despair into cold, hard resolve, was the accusation about the dog. It was so petty, so demonstrably false, that it broke the spell. She wasn't a confused young woman trying to heal. She was a con artist, and I had been her mark for her entire life. When I called Carol, my voice was devoid of tears or anguish. It was the voice of a woman who had just walked out of a burning building, soot-stained and blinking in the sunlight, but alive. After I laid out the whole sordid story, Carol was quiet for a moment. I could hear the faint clinking of ice in a glass. Okay, she said finally. The first thing we need to do is establish a profile for Dr. Ann Reed. We need to make her real, not just to Haley, but to us. And so the plan began. It felt like we were scriptwriters, or maybe spies, crafting a legend for our covert operative. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Haley had delivered so many of her verdicts, and we built Dr. Ann Reed from the ground up. She needs to have credentials that would impress Haley, Carol said, pulling a notepad from her bag. Let's say she got her doctorate from Stanford. That has a nice, authoritative ring to it. A postdoc at Johns Hopkins in, let's see, family systems theory. That sounds about right. I scribbled it down. What does she look like? Carol smiled. That's the beauty of telehealth. She only needs to be a voice. A calm, intelligent, impeccably professional voice. I think I can manage that. She took a sip of her iced tea. But we do need a digital footprint, just in case Haley gets curious. That was my department. I might be 65, but I'd designed websites for my own business for decades. I spent the next 2 days creating a simple, professional-looking online presence for Dr. Ann Reed. I bought a domain name. I built a landing page using a clean, minimalist template. It featured a stock photo of a pleasant-looking woman in her late 50s, with kind eyes and a thoughtful expression. I wrote a brief, jargon-laden biography, lifting phrases from real therapist websites. Dr. Reed employs an integrative approach, drawing from psychodynamic, cognitive behavioral, and narrative therapies to help clients reclaim their personal stories and move towards empowered authenticity. It was nonsense, but it was exactly the kind of nonsense that would appeal to Haley. Carol, meanwhile, handled the operational side. She bought a burner phone, a simple prepaid flip phone, so the number wouldn't trace back to her. She set up a new email address, Reed, PhD at securetherapist.net. It looked official. The masterstroke, however, was Carol's idea. For the first session, she said, I need to be somewhere that isn't my house. The background needs to be neutral. Professional, my guest room, I offered. Too risky. What if she sees a photo or a piece of furniture she recognizes? No, it needs to be completely anonymous. Carol tapped her chin. I know, there are co-working spaces downtown that rent small private offices by the hour. I'll rent one for 2 hours. I'll set up my laptop, put a couple of serious-looking books on the shelf behind me, and that will be Dr. Reed's office. It was brilliant. The initial video call would establish the legitimacy of the entire operation. After that, Carol could plausibly suggest switching to audio-only calls for deeper concentration, which would be easier and safer to manage from her own home. We also had to discuss the ethics of it, or rather the lack thereof. Carol, is this legal? I asked, stirring my coffee, the spoon clinking nervously against the ceramic. Probably not, she said without a hint of hesitation. I'm not her therapist, so I'm not violating any practitioner-client privilege. I'm not charging her money, so it's not fraud. But impersonating a mental health professional, even a fake one, is a big ethical no-no. If the state psychology board ever got wind of this, they'd have a field day, even if I am retired. Then why are you doing it? I asked, my heart aching with gratitude. Carol reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her skin was warm and steady. Meredith, I have sat by and watched your daughter emotionally bleed you dry for 15 years. I have watched her chip away at your confidence, drain your bank account, and take your unconditional love for granted. I have tried to give you advice, but you weren't ready to hear it. Now you are. This isn't about me playing therapist. This is about me, your best friend, helping you gather the evidence you need to finally, for the love of God, save yourself. Then her expression softened, and she told me something that solidified her resolve. She had a subplot of her own, a mirror to my own struggles. Her eldest son, Mark, had a son of his own, my godson, Liam. Liam was 22, and he was, in Carol's words, failing to launch. He was living at home, not working, spending his days playing video games while his parents paid for his car, his phone, his entire existence. Mark and his wife, they make excuses for him, Carol said, her voice laced with a familiar frustration. They say he's sensitive, that the job market is tough. It's the same language of coddling that you've used for Haley. Last week, I found out they dipped into their own retirement savings to buy him a new top-of-the-line gaming computer because he said his old one was stressing him out. I tried to talk to Mark, and he told me I was being too harsh, that I didn't understand the pressures young people face today. She shook her head, a sad, weary gesture. I can't force my own son to see the damage he's doing, but I'll be damned if I'm going to stand by and let Haley do the same thing to you. Maybe if I can help you fix this, I'll have the strength to have another harder conversation with my own family. Her confession forged a new powerful bond between us. We weren't just two old friends embarking on a crazy scheme. We were two mothers, two grandmothers, fighting back against a creeping tide of entitlement that threatened to drown the people we loved. The final piece of the plan was the recordings. Every session, every phone call between Haley and Dr. Reed would be recorded. Carol had software for her computer that could capture the video and audio of the initial call, and an app on her burner phone to record the subsequent conversations. The goal, Carol explained, her voice taking on the cool, analytical tone of the psychologist she once was, is not to trap her in lies. The goal is to let her talk. I won't challenge her narrative about you, not at first. I'll validate it. I'll use all the therapeutic language she loves. I'll say things like, that must have been so difficult for you, and tell me more about how that made you feel. We need her to feel safe. We need her to feel like she's found the ultimate ally, because when people feel safe, they stop filtering, they reveal their true motivations. And that, my friend, is what we're after. We're not looking for the trauma, we're looking for the agenda. The agenda. The word hung in the air. For weeks I had been drowning in the language of feelings, trauma, and pain. Carol had just thrown me a lifeline, and it was made of cold, hard purpose. It wasn't about my failings as a mother anymore. It was about my daughter's agenda, and we were going to get her to state it, in her own words, on the record. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself one last time. It was about the truth. But deep down, a small, hard part of me knew that the truth was going to be its own form of vengeance. The first session was scheduled for a Tuesday. I was a nervous wreck. I paced my living room, my stomach churning. What if Haley suspected something? What if Carol's internet went out? What if the whole thing blew up in our faces? At exactly 2 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Carol. It was a single word: showtime. I imagined her in that sterile rented office, her laptop open, her expression serene and professional, waiting for the call. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a strange mix of terror and glee. We were doing it. We were actually doing it. Haley came over for dinner that night. She was glowing. It was the only word for it. She looked lighter, almost euphoric. My session with Dr. Reed was incredible, she announced, taking a seat at the kitchen island. She didn't offer to help, of course. She never did. I feel so seen, so validated. I kept my back to her, busying myself with washing lettuce. My hands were shaking. Keep it simple, Murd. Don't push. I'm so glad to hear that, honey. What did you talk about? Oh, it was intense, she said, a note of pride in her voice. We did a deep dive into my early childhood, into the emotional neglect. Dr. Reed said that my constant need for external validation, my pattern of seeking out new projects and then abandoning them, is a classic response to a parent who only gives conditional approval. I was always trying to find the one thing that would finally make you proud of me, you see. I closed my eyes for a second, gripping the edge of the sink. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it. She had reframed her own lack of discipline and perseverance as a tragic quest for my love. It was brilliant. It was diabolical. I see, I said, my voice remarkably even. That's a very interesting perspective. Carol called me later that night, after Haley had left. Her voice was electric with a kind of professional excitement. Oh, Murd, it was better than I could have imagined, she said. She took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. I just had to nod and look sympathetic, and she unloaded everything. She has a completely constructed narrative of her life, a perfect, seamless story of victimhood, where every one of her bad decisions is actually your fault. It's a work of art, really. Carol had recorded the entire video call. She emailed me the audio file, stripped from the video. I sat in my office with the lights off, my headphones on, and I listened, hearing my daughter's voice, so earnest and convincing, detail my supposed cruelties to a stranger, a fake stranger who was actually my best friend, was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. She spoke of the time I'd missed her school play because I had the flu, not as a simple case of bad luck, but as a subconscious act of sabotage, because I was jealous of her talent. She recounted the story of the crashed car, but in her version the accident was caused by the overwhelming stress of trying to live up to my impossibly high standards. But it was Carol's performance that was truly stunning. As Dr. Reed, she was a master. Her voice was calm, empathetic, and full of therapeutic warmth. That sounds incredibly painful, Haley, she would murmur. The feeling that your own mother couldn't celebrate your gifts must have been very isolating. It was Haley's voice would reply, thick with self-pity. It's like she had to be the star of the show, always. Listening to it, I felt a strange detachment. The hurt was still there, but it was being overshadowed by a grim sense of purpose. Carol was right. We had to let her talk. We had to let her build her case, brick by imaginary brick. Over the next few weeks, the sessions continued, shifting to audio-only calls, as Carol had planned. I find that without the visual distraction, my clients are often able to access deeper emotional truths. Dr. Reed had told Haley, who had readily agreed. Every few days, a new audio file would land in my inbox. I would wait until I was alone, pour myself a small glass of sherry, and listen to the latest installment of the tragedy of Haley, as written and performed by its star. The narrative grew more and more elaborate. She now claimed to have somatic memories of being left to cry in her crib for hours, something I know for a fact never happened. David and I were light sleepers, and Haley had been a cherished, desperately wanted baby. I remembered us taking turns walking the floor with her, humming lullabies until our throats were raw. As Carol had predicted, her initial strategy was to validate, but slowly, subtly, she began to pivot. She began to introduce a new theme into their conversations. The theme of empowerment. In their fourth session, Haley was complaining about her financial dependence on me. It's just another tool of control, she said. She holds the purse strings so she can dictate my life. I can see how you would feel that way, Dr. Reed's calm voice replied. It must be incredibly disempowering to feel that your financial security is in someone else's hands. Have you ever considered what it would feel like to be completely financially independent from her? There was a pause. Well, I mean, of course, Haley said, sounding a little flustered. But with the trauma I'm working through, it's hard to hold down a conventional job. My nervous system is too dysregulated. Of course, Dr. Reed said smoothly. The healing must come first, but perhaps we can envision it as a long-term goal, a way to truly reclaim your autonomy, to take back your power. What would that life look like? A life where you didn't need anything from your mother at all? Haley's response was hesitant. It was clear she'd never actually considered it. She enjoyed the narrative of financial oppression, but she had no interest in giving up the actual funds. This was the first sign of the shift. Haley came over that weekend, and for the first time she seemed less sure of herself. The righteous fire was gone, replaced by a flicker of confusion. It's strange, she said, picking at a loose thread on one of my throw pillows. Dr. Reed thinks the ultimate goal of my therapy should be total independence. She's talking about me getting a job, a real career, and moving out and supporting myself. I arranged a bouquet of daisies in a vase, my movements slow and deliberate. Well, that sounds like very sound advice, dear, I said, my voice a portrait of maternal encouragement. A therapist is supposed to help you become a stronger, more capable person, after all. I know, but, she trailed off. I sort of thought she was going to help me fix you, to get you to understand what you did and make it right. Make it right, I asked, turning to look at her. What does that mean exactly? She flushed, suddenly defensive. Acknowledge the pain you caused and help me heal from it, financially. There it was, the agenda peeking out from behind the curtain of therapeutic jargon. I just nodded slowly. I see. The panic really began to set in about a week later. Carol, as Dr. Reed had given Haley an assignment, she was to draft a 5-year plan, including career goals, a budget, and steps toward finding her own place to live. It was a classic practical therapeutic exercise. And for Haley it was a nightmare. She called me in a full-blown meltdown. I can't do this, she cried. I'm a creative person. I can't be boxed in by budgets and 5-year plans. This is just like what you used to do, always trying to force me to be someone I'm not. I think Dr. Reed might be, I don't know, siding with you. The irony was so rich I nearly choked on it. Honey, she doesn't even know me, I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy. I'm sure she's just trying to help you in the way she thinks is best. No, you don't understand. She's supposed to be on my side. The silent takeover, as Carol and I had come to call it, was working better than we'd dreamed. My role was simple: to become a placid, agreeable mirror. Whenever Haley confronted me with some new confusing tidbit from Dr. Reed, I would simply nod and say how wise the doctor sounded. My agreement was more maddening to her than any argument. I was no longer the villain she could rage against. I was a cheerleader for the very things she was trying to avoid: responsibility and independence. The power was shifting, and she could feel the ground turning to sand beneath her feet. The expected support system Haley thought she could rally never materialized. This was another front in our quiet war, and one I had managed with subtle care. Haley had 2 aunts, my sisters, and a handful of cousins she was intermittently close to, usually when she needed something. After the first couple of weeks of Haley's trauma revelations, I knew she would eventually try to recruit them to her cause, to create a united front of familial pressure against me. I had to preemptively neutralize that threat. I didn't call them with a dramatic counter-accusation. That would have just looked like a he said, she said squabble. Instead, I called my sister Sarah first, the more empathetic of the two. Sarah, I began, my voice intentionally weary and sad. I need to talk to you about something. It's about Haley. Is she okay? Sarah asked, her voice instantly full of concern. Physically, she's fine, but she's going through something. She's seeing a new therapist, and she's uncovered a lot of anger towards me. She's been saying some very hurtful things, that I was a terrible mother, that I've caused her deep trauma. I let out a shaky sigh. I know I wasn't a perfect mother. Nobody is, but it's on another level. I'm just so worried about her, and honestly, my heart is broken. I didn't ask Sarah to take my side. I didn't discredit Haley. I framed it as a mother's sorrow and concern. I was the sad, confused victim of my daughter's mysterious psychological break. It was a role I played to perfection. Oh, Meredith, that's awful, Sarah said, just as I knew she would. Haley adores you. She's probably just confused. This therapist sounds like a quack. No, I said quickly. I'm sure the therapist is just helping her process her feelings. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm losing her. I had a similar conversation with my other sister Linda and a couple of my more influential cousins. The message was the same. I was heartbroken, confused, and worried for Haley's mental state. By the time Haley made her calls a week later, her ammunition was useless. She called Sarah, ready to unleash her litany of my crimes. Aunt Sarah, I have to tell you what I'm learning in therapy. Mom, she was a classic narcissist. The emotional neglect was. Sarah cut her off, her voice full of syrupy pity. Oh, you poor thing. Your mother called me. She's absolutely devastated. She's so worried about you. She just blames herself for everything. Haley was stunned into silence. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She had wanted an ally, a co-conspirator. Instead, she got an aunt who saw her as a troubled young woman who was making her poor, sainted mother miserable. Her attempts to recruit the rest of the family went the same way. No one would engage with her accusations. They would just say things like, "You should be gentle with your mother, she loves you so much," or "I hope you feel better soon, dear." The family wasn't exiling me. They were exiling her narrative. They had cordoned it off like a biohazard, offering her sympathy from a safe distance, but refusing to become infected by it. She was isolated, and her frustration was mounting. This desperation led directly to her final fatal mistake. She had one last session with Dr. Reed, a frantic, unhinged phone call that Carol later described as a masterpiece of unintentional confession. The audio file arrived in my inbox with the subject line, "The Smoking Gun." I listened that evening, the glass of sherry in my hand forgotten. Haley was weeping. "She won't listen." Haley sobbed into the phone. "My whole family, they're all on her side. They think I'm the one with the problem. But you know, Dr. Reed, you know what she did to me. I hear your frustration, Haley." Carol's voice was a sea of calm. "It must feel incredibly invalidating when your reality is not acknowledged by those around you. We've talked about your mother's use of financial control. Perhaps we need to address that more directly. Perhaps a symbolic gesture is needed to help her understand the depth of the injury." Yes, exactly. Haley seized on the idea. "A symbolic gesture. What do you mean?" "Well," Carol said, her tone thoughtful and leading, "in therapeutic contexts, sometimes a tangible act of reparation can be a powerful tool for healing, not as a punishment, but as an acknowledgement of the debt that is owed. It would force your mother to confront the material impact of the emotional damage she caused." Reparations, Haley breathed the word. It was as if Carol had given her the keys to the kingdom. Yes, reparations. That's what I need. It's not about the money, it's about the principle. She needs to give me something significant, to prove she's sorry. What would feel significant to you, Haley? Carol asked, her voice a gentle prod. What would truly represent a transfer of power, a healing of that wound? There was a long pause. I held my breath. I knew what was coming. I had known for years that it was her ultimate prize. The lake house, Haley said, her voice low and covetous. The lake house my father built. It was always my special place. She knows that. If she were truly sorry, if she truly wanted me to heal, she would sign it over to me, as a reparation, for my trauma. I clicked off the recording. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Checkmate. The lake house was David's sanctuary. He had built it with his own 2 hands on a piece of land his father had left him. Every board, every nail, was a testament to his love for nature and for us. It was where we'd spent our summers, where Haley had learned to swim, where David had taught her to identify constellations in the clear night sky. It was my most precious link to him, a vault of my happiest memories, and my daughter wanted to claim it as a payment for pain I had never inflicted. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice now. It was about protecting David's legacy from the grasping hands of his own entitled child. 2 days later, Haley requested a family meeting. She sent a text message to me that was dripping with false formality. Mother, I believe it is time for us to sit down and discuss the terms of my healing process. I will be at the house on Saturday at 2 p.m. Please be prepared to have a productive and open-minded conversation. I texted Carol, the eagle is landing. She replied almost instantly, I'll bring the popcorn and the portable speaker. Saturday arrived, a bright, clear autumn day. The air was crisp, and the leaves on the maple tree in the front yard were a fiery explosion of red and orange. It felt like a day for endings and new beginnings. I spent the morning in my garden, calmly weeding the flower beds, feeling a profound sense of peace. The anxiety was gone, the hurt was gone. All that remained was a cold, clear certainty. At 1:30, Carol arrived. She wasn't dressed as my friend. She was dressed as Dr. Reed might. She wore a pair of tailored gray trousers, a silk blouse, and a sharp blazer. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and she wore a pair of simple professional glasses. She carried a sleek leather briefcase. How do I look? She asked, striking a small pose in the hallway. Like you're about to foreclose on a small nation, I said with a grin. It's perfect. We set the stage in the living room. It was the most formal room in the house, the one we rarely used. It had a chill to it that felt appropriate. We placed 2 wingback chairs opposite the sofa. I would sit in one, Carol in the other. Haley would get the sofa, alone in the middle. Carol placed her small, powerful Bluetooth speaker discreetly on the bookshelf behind the sofa. She connected her phone to it, testing the connection. The trap was set. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Haley standing on the porch. She was wearing a black power suit, her hair slicked back. She looked like a caricature of a ruthless businesswoman from an 80s movie. She held a file folder in her hand, and her expression was one of smug triumph. She thought she was walking into a surrender. She had no idea she was walking into an ambush. Mother, she said, striding past me into the house. Her eyes scanned the living room, and she smirked when she saw the formal seating arrangement. She was so sure this was all for her. Then her eyes landed on Carol, sitting coolly in the wingback chair, and her face faltered for a fraction of a second. Aunt Carol, she said, her voice tight with surprise. I wasn't aware you'd be joining us. Hello, Haley, Carol said, her voice even. Meredith felt it would be helpful to have a neutral third party present. Haley recovered quickly, a confident smile plastered back on her face. A neutral third party. Of course, she probably thought Carol would be another sympathetic ear for her tale of woe. She sat down on the sofa, placing her file folder on the coffee table with a thud. Well, shall we begin? Haley said. All business. I've come prepared to discuss the path forward. As you know, I've been doing some very intensive work with my therapist, Dr. Reed. Ah, yes, I said, leaning forward slightly. Dr. Reed, that's actually the first thing on our agenda. We need to talk about your therapy. Haley's smile tightened. My therapy is confidential. Not this time, I said softly. You see, Haley, you've been misinformed. Your therapist's name is not Anne Reed. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. What are you talking about? Of course it is. I gestured to the woman sitting beside me. Haley, I'd like to properly introduce you to your therapist. This is Dr. Carol Fisher, retired clinical psychologist. My best friend of 40 years. The color drained from Haley's face. Her eyes darted from me to Carol, and back again. The smug confidence evaporated, replaced by a dawning horrified disbelief. She looked like a cartoon character who had just run off a cliff and realized there was no ground beneath her. What is this? She stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. This is insane. You're lying. Am I? Carol said, her voice losing its friendly, Aunt Carol warmth and taking on the crisp, analytical tone of Dr. Reed. Tell me, Haley, does my voice sound familiar? We've spent a great deal of time together on the phone over the past 6 weeks. We've talked about your insecure attachment, your mother's narcissism, your somatic memories. Haley stared at Carol, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The recognition, the pure, gut-wrenching horror of it was flooding her features. She had poured out her darkest, most manipulative thoughts to her mother's best friend. You, she whispered, pointing a trembling finger at Carol. It was you? The whole time? The whole time, Carol confirmed. And every session was recorded. That was my cue. I reached for my phone, which was already connected to the speaker. You know, I said, my voice conversational. I was particularly struck by our last conversation, the one about reparations. I pressed play, and from the bookshelf behind her, Haley's own voice filled the silent room clear as a bell. It's not about the money, it's about the principle, her recorded voice said, full of self-pity. She needs to give me something significant, to prove she's sorry. Carol's recorded voice as Dr. Reed murmured, What would feel significant to you, Haley? Haley flinched as if she'd been struck. She looked wildly around the room, as if trying to find the source of her own betrayal. And then came the final, damning words from the speaker. The lake house my father built. If she were truly sorry, if she truly wanted me to heal, she would sign it over to me, as a reparation, for my trauma. I pressed stop. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with shame and exposure. Haley sat frozen on the sofa, her face a pale, waxy mask. The file folder on the table, which I now knew contained the deed transfer papers she'd expected me to sign, seemed like a monument to her own greed. I leaned back in my chair. The vindication was not a fiery, triumphant feeling. It was a cold, quiet calm. The storm had passed. The charade is over, Haley, I said, my voice devoid of anger. It was simply a statement of fact. There is no repressed trauma. There is no narcissistic abuse. There is just a long, exhausting history of you manipulating me, and me being foolish enough to let you. That ends today. She finally found her voice, a pathetic, strangled cry. How could you do this to me? It was a trick. You entrapped me. No, Carol said, her voice sharp and precise. A therapist helps a patient find their own truth. And that's exactly what I did. I simply held up a mirror, and you showed me exactly who you are. You're not a victim, Haley. You're a manipulator who has weaponized the language of therapy to excuse your own entitlement. You don't have trauma. You have a character flaw. I stood up. Here is the new reality, I said, looking down at my daughter, who for the first time in her life looked small. The bank of mom is closed, permanently. The car insurance is canceled as of Monday. The cell phone plan will be terminated at the end of the month. You will find a job, you will find your own apartment, and you will support yourself. You are a 38-year-old woman, and it is long past time you started acting like one. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up her file folder. I didn't even open it. And the lake house, I said, meeting her tear-filled eyes, will remain in this family. It is a monument to your father's love, not a payment for your imaginary pain. You will never set foot in it again without my express invitation. She started to sob then, not the performative wails of before, but the ugly, hiccuping sobs of true defeat. But what am I supposed to do? She cried. That, I said, turning and walking towards the door, is finally your problem to solve. I paused and looked back at her, one last time. I do love you, Haley, and because I love you, I will make you one final offer. If you decide you want real help, from a real board-certified therapist that I vet and approve of, I will pay for the first 6 months. That is the only thing you will ever get from me again. The choice is yours. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out of the living room, Carol following behind me, and left my daughter alone with the wreckage of her own making. As I closed the door, I could still hear her crying. For the first time in years, the sound brought me no pain. It only brought me peace. It's been 6 months since the intervention. The silence in my life is the first thing I notice. It's not an empty silence anymore. It's a peaceful one. It's the sound of my own thoughts, uninterrupted by manufactured drama. It's the sound of the wind in the trees in my garden, of the quiet hum of the refrigerator, of a life no longer held hostage. Haley did not take me up on my offer for therapy. I didn't expect her to. To accept it would have been to admit that she was the one with the problem, and her ego, it seems, is more resilient than her finances. She moved out of her trendy apartment a month after our confrontation, unable to afford the rent. My sister Linda told me she's living in a small studio across town, in a less fashionable neighborhood. She's working as a receptionist at a dental office. I imagine she hates it. Part of me, the part that will always be her mother, feels a pang of sadness for her struggle. But a larger part, the part that I fought so hard to reclaim, knows this is not a punishment. It is a cure. It is the world finally being allowed to be sharp. She sends me text messages sometimes. They're no longer accusatory, they're terse and tinged with a sullen resentment. My car broke down. The repair is $800. I read it and I delete it. I do not reply. It is the hardest and most loving thing I have ever done. Carol and I took that trip to Italy. We spent 2 weeks eating pasta, drinking wine, and exploring ancient ruins. We laughed until our sides hurt. One evening, sitting on a balcony overlooking the hills of Tuscany, she raised her glass to Dr. Anne Reed. She said with a wry smile, "May she rest in peace." We toasted to our crazy, desperate, and ultimately successful plan. We saved me, and in the process, I think Carol found the strength she needed. She told me she had a long, difficult talk with her son and his wife. They didn't take it well at first, but she held her ground. Liam, her grandson, now has a part-time job and is contributing to household expenses. It's a start. My relationship with the rest of my family has healed. With Haley's toxic narrative silenced, the old, easy affection has returned. They see me not as a villain or a victim, but simply as Meredith, as their sister, their aunt, their friend. So here I am, in my quiet house, with my peaceful garden and my memories that are finally my own again. The photo albums are back on the shelves, their pages no longer feeling like evidence in a trial. They are just pictures of a life, a real life, full of love and mistakes and joy. I often wonder what you would have done in my place. What do you do when the person you love most in the world uses that love as a weapon against you? What do you do when your own child tries to gaslight you into oblivion? It's a terrible question to have to answer. I was told for weeks that I was a narcissist, a manipulator, a monster. And in the end, I had to become a manipulator to fight back. It's a debatable choice, I know. Some might say I went too far, that my deception was as bad as hers. But it wasn't about revenge, not really, until perhaps it was. It was about survival. It was about taking back the story of my own life. My daughter had to learn the true meaning of transference, that psychological phenomenon where you project your feelings about one person onto another. She tried to transfer all her failings onto me. And in the end, I had to transfer her back to where she belonged, into the arms of her own consequences. It was the only way for either of us to be free. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please press the like button and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. We love reading your comments, so please share your thoughts below. And if you'd like to hear another story, just click on the next video. We hope to see you there.